today's episode, I discuss about capitalism after the pandemic with Andrés Velasco in a conversation moderated by Tony Roldan. Andrés is currently the Dean of the Public Policy School of the London School of Economics and has been previously Finance Minister of Chile and a professor at the Kennedy School at Harvard, NYU, and Columbia University. He has been a very successful academic, having been a leading scholar on financial crisis, liquidity crisis, exchange rate, international economics. First of all, thanks for the Friedrich-Neumann-Stiftung, and thanks to Asade for having us here. It's really a pleasure, and it's really great to share a stage with Andrés. The second thing that I would also add in a time dimension is this policy that Andrés was describing by the Fed, the Bank of England, the ECB, and the governments of we'll do whatever it takes. We'll just plug as much money, put as much money in the economy as necessary and more. How long can this policy last? I mean, and I would like to hear Andrés, because this is something Latin America has a lot of experience in. It's a bit of an Argentina policy. We are printing money and not producing goods. I mean, the usual economics view of this is that this ends up after 2, 3, 4, 5 months of doing this thing, it ends up in hyperinflation. Of course, now demand is so suppressed, everybody's home. So the main concern economists have is deflation. Prices go down because nobody's spending. But as you continue doing this basic money printing, as you continue injecting so much money into the economy without goods to produce, and we move into the fall, if this crisis lasts for sufficiently long, then the big fear from an economic perspective has to be that at some point you lose the anchor of expectations, that people start thinking that this money doesn't mean anything, and that we lose control of the whole monetary system. So I would agree with Andrés that the situation is dire economically. I would add these two uncertainties on the immunology side, and a question that if the crisis lasts for very long, a question about how long can this monetary stimulus and the whole stimulus packages we're putting in the US already $2 trillion. The ECB is right now buying assets at a rate of 38 billion a week. Those are big numbers, and how long can we last doing that?
I don't know, Andrés, if you want to come in
just a thought. Unlike Luis, I never spent any academic days at the University of Chicago, so I'm a little bit less worried about inflation than he is. The two guys who get it right, in my view, and you can see their piece in Vox EU, are Jean Pisani and Olivier Blanchard, who wrote a very nice piece in which they make a point which I think is valid. Money and bonds issued by the government are very different beasts when the interest rate is positive and high. When the interest rate is zero for all practical purposes, whether the UK government issues something called a pound or whether it issues something called a UK government bond, they're both government liabilities. They both carry an interest rate of zero. And what we know is that debt is not inflationary. Money in these circumstances is probably not inflationary either. In fact, 10 years ago, in the middle of the crisis, the Federal Reserve increased its balance sheet by a factor of 4, not 4%, 4 times. And the inflation rate in the US hovered around zero. And in fact, it was negative for short periods of time, as it was in the Eurozone. Now, can you do that again and still remain at very low levels of inflation? I think the answer in the short run is yes. The big question, and Olivier and Jean make this point clearly in their piece, is at some point, a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, the interest rate will have to rise. At that point, bonds or money are not equivalents. People may want to hold onto the bonds and dump the money. And the big question is, what will the government do or the central bank do at that point? One thing they can do is pay interest on reserves, which is what the Fed did, what the Bank of England did, not the ECB. That's fiscally expensive, but it's perfectly feasible. And that is a pretty strong way of preventing inflation in the future. So I would not lose much over inflation.
So Andrés, let me ask you directly on that. It's nice to disagree. So I am also not losing any sleep over inflation over the next very short time. But you must agree that just let's put the case extreme. Everybody's staying home month after month. All the checks in the economy, all the wages are coming from the Fed, just put in the US, basically from the Treasury, but basically directly financed from the Fed. And we're not producing anything. At some point, you have to agree that this is not sustainable. I mean, do you think there's really no limit over the November, December, January, February scenarios?
No, I think I will be first to admit that I have some sense we can guess what the world looks like if this goes on for 3 or 4 months. If it goes on for 6 or 7, I have no idea. And I worry then not only about the economics, I worry about our people's sanity, people's health. Those of us who have teenagers in the house, whether civil war will break out inside every family. Many things could go wrong. But one economics thought. What you're saying is the government is pumping up demand, there's no supply. So what happens to the demand-supply balance? That is a valid question, but it is also important to remember that while we're home, we're consuming a lot less than we would have been otherwise. I had tickets to go to Italy and got them canceled. I had tickets to the theater, had to cancel them. I was going out to restaurants with my wife. I'm no longer doing that. So consumption is down. Savings is going up. And of course, our savings is exactly what the government is tapping to be able to, buy those bonds. So there is a kind of equilibrium there. How long it will last is anybody's guess.
Okay, I am happy to agree with that. There's no question the deflationary shock is there. There's no question we're all spending way, way, way less than we used to. And that's clearly the first order effect right now is like there is really no demand and deflation is clearly the biggest short run problem. I would not disagree with that.